Hey guys, welcome to an interesting video on Wild Rift. So today we're back with the tier list for patch 6.3c, and this time around we're kind of doing something a little bit different. As you guys can see up on screen already, we have the ADC tier list. Now, we have started off with ADCs before, but we've always covered all 5 roles. But this time I'm actually only going to cover ADC for 2 reasons. Now, firstly, I feel that in some of the other lanes, especially for example top lane, honestly, I don't play top lane at all. So, although of course I do still have my own opinion on who is the best and worst top laner, really I'm not like as the patches go on, I feel like I'm less and less qualified to kind of give you guys a top lane tier list or even the other roles like mid lane, jungle, etc. I think that I'm really the most confident in talking about ADCs because that's the role that I play and that's the champions that I interact the most with. I might be able to do support as well since they basically play in the same lane as me as well. And of course the second reason is of course so I can spend more time talking about the ADCs, right? I mean, even my opinions on the other lanes are kind of skewed um since I play ADC, right? I mean, I try to give as unbiased an opinion as possible, but for example, in an ADC perspective, champions like Master Yi or Mordekaiser are very, very strong because there's very little counterplay against them as ADCs, but the two of them aren't really that strong. They're not S plus tier in the jungle or the top lane, respectively. So, yeah, another reason why is, of course, I can spend more time talking about each ADC and why I rank them as how I rank them, and we can honestly just jump straight into it. Now, honestly, I had a hard time with the top of the tier list for this patch because honestly, I feel that after playing like all of the ADCs, I really don't feel like there's any far and away best ADC in this patch. Like, of course, previously we had Corki, previously we had Varus, but both of them have gotten nerfs already. So Varus, honestly, after that nerf that he got, really became a lot weaker. Like the nerf that he got to his passive, I thought wouldn't be too bad, but it really was pretty, it's a pretty bad nerf. Alright, so at the end of the day, I was kind of debating between putting 6 people in the S tier, basically moving the S plus tier to S tier, but I don't want to leave the S plus tier empty because it really doesn't make sense. So I will say that I put like the 3 champions I think are better in the S plus tier. Now I don't really think Samira, Lucian, or Xayah belongs in the S plus tier, but then again, I think Jhin and MF also kind of, and Corki for that matter, also have kind of glaring weaknesses, right? And what I mean by that is I think currently the meta is focused a lot more around bursty ADCs, and what I mean by that is obviously you have the backline hyper carries like your Zeris, your Jinxes, your Sivers kind of thing, but they aren't doing as well in the current meta, right? What's doing a lot better right now is those burst kind of ADCs like MF, Jhin, and Lucian, who are focused a lot more on doing a lot of damage in a very short amount of time. So I think that they are actually better now. Of course, Jhin and MF because of Dark Harvest, and Lucian just just is has always been good really. So let's kind of go through it one by one. So first up, the top 3, we have Corki, we have Jin, and we have MF. Now all of them are really close. You can kind of rearrange the order how you want it, but I think they're all very similar in terms of power level. Now Corki has always been good since the rework. He's gotten a bunch of nerfs, but in reality he still does very decent damage. He has good poke, good all in, which is a very deadly combo, right? Because in lane he can poke you with his Qs and his rockets, and then if your support kind of goes in, you can use your Gatling gun, dash in, and then just go all in. So he's really good poke, really good all in, decent early game, scales well into the mid and late game, and pretty much is just a pretty strong champion. Then we have Jin and MF, right? Both of them have benefited a lot from the Dark Harvest being added to the game. Of course, I've done videos on 3 builds of MF as well as Dark Harvest on Jin. I'm going to be doing another video on Fleet Footwork on Jin sooner or later. But honestly, I think that these two, like, just having Dark Harvest and just having a lot of burst damage is just helping them out a lot in this current meta where you can basically do insane amounts of damage even against tanks, right? If you get fed, even MF and Jin can kill tanks. But tanks of course are their main weakness because if you don't get fed and you don't stack your Dark Harvest, it's really really difficult to kill tanks, right? Unlike a lot of the other hyper carries, of course they still are, I wouldn't say kill tanks easily, but they definitely don't have as hard of a time as Jin and MF. Then let's take a look at the S tier. So of course, first up we have Samira. Now Samira, honestly, I think is an S plus tier champion. The only issue with Samira is she's not blind pickable, and she's not pickable in every game because she gets hard countered by CC, especially point and click CC like Vayne Condemn, like Pantheon Stun, things like that, right? So you cannot pick her into every game. You can really only pick her into games where there's no CC, little CC, or not so much point and click CC. Of course, you can pick her against a CC heavy team if you're a very good Samira player and very, very patient to wait out all of their CC spells. But I personally never, pick Samira in these scenarios because I really just think that they're better champions at that point than Samira. But Samira, it really is a champion that if you snowball, you just take over the game, and it's probably the most snowbally ADC out of them all. You just snowball, you just start one-shotting people, and even when you're behind, it just takes that one like idiot on the enemy team to give you the reset, and then you ult into the entire enemy team, and sometimes you can turn a fight and get back into the game. And that's happened to me many times. That's happened for me many times as well. So I do think Samira is pretty strong. Now Lucian, of course, does a lot of burst damage with the Essence Reaver and the Magnetic Blaster, which is basically the way you want to build Lucian. Nowadays, it's always going to be these two items. First, just for that burst damage, you dash in, do a ton of burst damage, and then hopefully either you kill someone or you kind of just run away and wait for your cooldowns. So Lucian, another champion where his burst damage is just really good. Now Xayah, I would say is just probably the best like attack speed based champion right now. But the only issue with Xayah and why she's also in the S tier and not the S plus tier is because she is very kind of dependent on the enemy team, right? She's really only good into like melee or short range. Like she sucks against like people who have long range because you have such a hard time pulling back your feathers and such a hard time like just doing what you want to do with your feathers that at that point a lot of the other longer range attack speed carries like Ashe, for example, or even the B tier ones would just be better than Xayah. So Xayah is great in the situations that she's great in, and just like okay in the situations that she's not that great in. Then we have the A plus tier where we start to have some of the more attack speed based champions as well as Ezreal. So Sivir I think is still really decent, but the only issue is that she got nerfed a bunch of times as well. And really she's only good into teams that have like a very solid front line. Very solid front line for you to bounce your boomerangs off of. And her damage is definitely getting lower and lower nowadays, but she's still a very decent champion, still very serviceable. Now, Varus, as I mentioned, got a bunch of nerfs. Now, he can't really one-shot people anymore. First, he got like 2-3 rounds of nerfs already. He can't really one-shot people very well. Of course, if you get fed, you can still do that, as with any champion who gets fed. But your damage is a little bit low at the moment, so as a result, you can't really be ranking Varus that high. Now, Ashe, I think, is kind of in a similar vein to Sivir. Does very well into, or not really Sivir. Sivir, yes, but also Xayah, right? Who does very well into champions that you can kite, right? So you really pick Ashe and Xayah in a lot of the same spots because the both of them do very well into champions that you can kite. So Ashe, of course, you can slow them down, you can kite them out, you can even run them down if the situation requires. But I think Ashe, she did just get nerfed on her Q as well, which does show that she is strong, which is why she's even getting a nerf. I do think that she is, a pretty strong champion at the moment. A lot of utility with your long range ulti. Of course, you have your hawk shot just for extra vision and all the slows, and you still do a very decent amount of damage. Now Ezreal, right? So Ezreal, the biggest strength he has is he's a very safe champion with his E, right? He also can burst people down if you get fed with a single combo like a W into EQ auto or alt. Probably he's gonna kill some squishy targets. You guys will see. I am gonna be posting an Ezreal video in the coming days where I basically try to do that. But the main thing about Ezreal is normally in a lot of situations, right? If they're tanks, you cannot eat through them, right? And if you're already gonna face the weakness of not being able to eat through tanks and not having wave clear, having MF or Jhin is just better because they have really good wave clear, but they can't eat through tanks either. The only main advantage Ezreal has over them is the fact that Ezreal has mobility, whereas they do not. They don't have any dashes or anything of the sort. So that's the main advantage Ezreal has, and the only reason why you really pick Ezreal over something like an MF or a Jhin, right? So he's a very niche pick nowadays as well. Not gonna be picked very often. Then you have the A tier, right? You have Caitlyn and you have Draven. So Caitlyn, the main reason why she's there is because she really doesn't have very much bad lane matchups. Honestly, that's also really the case for Jhin and MF. They don't really have that many bad lane matchups. In fact, for Caitlyn, you can bully a lot of the lanes and you can be neutral in most of the other lanes. You don't really lose lane to anybody just because of how high a range you have. Of course, the a little bit more threatening ones are the Samiras and the Lucians. Although they have very short range, if they're able to go in and burst you, then you are in a little bit of trouble. And then you have Draven. So the reason why Draven ranks above a lot of the hyper carries is because number one, if you're a good Draven, you're gonna make him work. Number two is that the meta now has a lot of burst heavy champions like Jin and MF who kind of do want to fight in the early game to snowball. Draven kind of wants to do that too. So if you can play Draven well, and if you can instead kill them and use snowball, you're going to be in a very good spot. Compared to like if it was a meta of like hyper carries, Draven, still has an easier time killing them, but they don't really want to fight. They kind of just want to kite out and just kind of just want to walk away from you. And then in the B tier, sadly, we have basically majority of the hyper carries, the late game hyper carries that you think of when you think of ADCs. So you have Kai'Sa, Tristana, Jinx, and Zeri. Now, of which I think the worst is definitely Zeri, as I covered in the Zeri video like 1-2 days ago. After her rework, not being able to steal shields and gain movement speed anymore, she's just like a fun champion to play, but she's objectively, I think, the worst out of the hyper carries that you have, except for Twitch, of course, who's like even worse than that. Then you have like of course sorry, not Jin, Kai'Sa, Tristana, and Jinx all have kind of their own little nuances to them. They're all late game hyper carries. However, of course, Kai'Sa has the ability to 1v1 people easily, has the ability to follow up. And of course, you guys know Kai'Sa is my most played champion. I love playing Kai'Sa, but even I will have to admit that Kai'Sa is not in the greatest spot right now. Tristana also a little bit similar to Kai'Sa, but of course different. You can play backline hyper carry. Of course, you can jump in and like be a bit of an assassin. Of course, Tristana's damage is really not as high as it once was. She's also gotten a bunch of nerfs already, so she really is only great when she snowballs. Otherwise, you have to reach like late game, like 4 items. Then she becomes a machine gun and becomes really really powerful. Jinx sort of similar. You kind of need to wait for 3 to 4 items for you to really really come online. And also, I'm about to make a Jinx video. But Jinx is definitely a very serviceable carry. Of course, when you get fed and when you start resetting, you're gonna take over the game. And Vayne, of course, is a very, very niche ADC, which we just talked about yesterday, right? She's really only good into extremely tanky teams. But again, even into extremely tanky teams, you have other champions who you can play, like Varus, Sivir, things like that, right? But of course, Vayne is a really decent choice and of course, really fun champion to play. So if you want to hyper carry on Vayne, then you can definitely go that route. And then finally, we have the worst tier. Of course, Twitch is still down there. Again, I think that even though Twitch did get that buff on his E and in some of his base stats, I still don't think he's better than any of the other hyper carries. You're better off picking somebody else. The only reason why you pick Twitch is if you have fun with his invisibility. Now, Senna, of course, this is the farming Senna is always going to be bad. In support role, though, Senna is pretty decent after she got that buff, the mini rework, I guess you could say. Kalista, I think, is definitely the worst range ADC because she basically has trouble dealing with tanks, right? She is attack speed based, but she's very early game focused and very snowball dependent, right? So who else is early game focused and snowball dependent? Draven, for example, is a better choice than Kalista. And then you, of course, have the early game burst champions like Lucian, Jin, and MF, all of which are just better options than Kalista. So Kalista really is kind of a fish out of water at the moment, doesn't really have a place in the meta, unfortunately. And Neela is just a very, very niche counter pick. You almost never pick Neela, but sometimes you do. Like I recently picked Neela, although that game didn't go well, where I was against like a Tryndamere jungle, a Yasuo in the mid lane, and a attack speed ADC. And that's when you have a very good counterplay with your W being able to immune like all 3 of their attacks at the same time. So that is going to be my tier list for patch 6.3c on the ADC role exclusively. So let me know what you guys think of the tier list and whether just doing ADC alone without doing other roles is fine. But with all that said, thank you guys so much for watching the video and goodbye.